722 BCE, Assyrians deport 27,280 from northern Israel due to criminal money lending practices. 586 BCE, native Babylonians exile Judean elite and destroy first temple due to massive child sacrificing rituals being enacted within Babylonian temples. 135 CE, Hadrian bans them from Jerusalem after the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was a massive revolt against the government at the time funded by the corrupt activists spreading fallacious propagandized lies to emit chaos. 1182, Philip Augustus expels them from the French royal domain after a massive money lending scam was exposed, vampirically draining the nation's native men and women. 1290, Edward I expels all 16,000 anti-Christian sewer dwellers from England because of usury corruption, specifically targeting the warrior knight class into debt. 1306 and 1390.
Usury and corruption. They were expelled.
Philip IV and Charles VI expelled them from France after a huge fiscal seizure was thwarted onto the French people from insider usury manipulation. 1421, Austria in Vienna, mass expulsion under Albert V when massive child sacrificing rituals were exposed on top of organized plans to put the nation's middle class into a crippling debt. 1492.
That is oh my God, what is the worship? It's part of Baal, the Baal system structure. There are over 300 something Baal gods named in the Bible. Oh my God, why can't I can see it in my head and I can't say the name, but they did child sacrificing. And I've done a video on this before. Who the true Canaanites are. Oh my God, it's going to come to me while he's talking.
Spain. Alhambra decree expels 40,000 small hats after massive blasphemy against Jesus Christ was publicly exposed, including the mass targeting of Christian boys from working class families for blood libel trafficking. 1497, Portugal forces mass expulsion after desecration of their holiest Catholic reliquaries and meeting places were caught red-handed by the same usual suspects. 1670, Leopold I expels them from Vienna and Austria after illegal money lending practices and consistent plots to corrupt the youth were exposed. Between the 1948 to 1970s, apparently 850,000 reported expelled to flee Arab countries after World War II, from Iraq, Egypt, Yemen, Libya, Syria, etc., via programs and asset seizures. And I'm not including several hundreds of smaller city-state expulsions that occurred all across Germany, Italy, and Eastern Europe. And notice the changing names to fit the cultural context and language syntax at that time, whether they call themselves Israelites, Judeans, Pharisees, Ashkenazim, Sephardim, Mizrahim, whatever it is. It's like that previous video I made. It doesn't matter if they call themselves Baal, Moloch, Kronos, or Saturn. It's the rabbinical of today that have taken shape and form as the same Satanists of the past 109 times over. So I excluded a lot, but with that being said, this video will be an unvarnished chronicle that the so-called polite and academically handheld historians never dare to deliver with open honesty. The history of the chosen people, who cannot be named as the archetype of the diaspora nation, a people scattered, renamed, restricted, resented, and repeatedly expelled, not because of some insane Gentile jealousy that they always repeatedly claim, but because of the concrete recurring frictions that arose when their religious practices of segregation, economic backstabbery, financial usury, defilement of the youth, and supremacism collided with the host societies that they inhabited. And to be perfectly clear, this is not sympathy nor condemnation, not conspiracy. I just want to make a video with plain records of events, drawn from primary chronicles, royal edicts, ecclesiastical decrees, and modern scholarly consensus from their own sources, by the way, written by them. We will trace it from the ancient kingdoms through the Pharisee to rabbinic transformation, the medieval expulsions, and into the modern era, naming the practices that host cultures repeatedly found intolerable before their expulsions occurred. So I ask you to first listen to this whole video, and then at the end of it, you tell me whether it was wrong or right. You tell me if it was fair or not. So let's begin at the root. The people who became known as today originated as the ancient Israelites and Hebrews of the Levant, with the southern kingdom of Judah giving the later ethnonym after the northern kingdom of Israel fell to the Assyrians in 722 BCE. The Assyrians under Sargon II deported 27,280 inhabitants of Samaria.
What I was looking for was the biblical name of the religious leaders in the Bible that did child sacrificing, which was Molech.
Resettled them across the empire. This was the first major recorded expulsion and dispersion of these tribes, scattering 10 of the 12 into what legend calls the Lost Tribes. The survivors in Judah faced the Babylonian captivity in 586 BCE when Nebuchadnezzar II destroyed the first temple and exiled the elite to Babylon. There, under Persian rule after Cyrus the Great's conquest, they returned in waves, but they never fully reconstituted the old formation. Instead, a permanent diaspora consciousness took root while maintaining their Talmudic philosophy of supremacism and despondent manipulation against outsiders, whom they then referred to as the Goyim. And these are the Jews of today. And these defiling so-called persecuted religious communities persisted in Babylon, Egypt, and beyond.
And what is the white nationalists claiming they are? They've claimed they are persecuted now. So that type of mindset has rubbed off. I don't know if rubbed off, because I think they've always been that way, because the KKK is a part of a religious, they believe they're Christians and and their hierarchy is the wizard, the master wizard in orange, it would be Trump. It would be Trump.
Met in secrecy, enacting the same strategies that we see today, because there's nothing new under the sun. Fast forward to the Roman era, the true pivot into diaspora pattern was made into permanence onto their identity as a parasitic people. The Bar Kokhba revolt of 135 CE sealed this even further. Emperor Hadrian crushed the satanic rebellion and banned the so-called chosen from Jerusalem. This was not mere conquest. It was deliberate demographic engineering to prevent further degeneration inside their social cohesion. From this point, the people became defined by exile, with communities stretching from Rome to Persia, North Africa to Rhineland. They carried multiple overlapping identities: Hebrews by ancestry, Israelites by covenant, Judeans by geography, and increasingly the term began to dominate for the stereotype that they continued to legitimize throughout different cultures and different people. But whatever they call themselves, however they masquerade themselves, whatever costumes they wear, they all worship the same entity, the Dark One. But the critical shift was
now the costume they're wearing is neo-national, white nationalists.
Their projected sectarianism weaponized as a defense mechanism for their wrongdoing. Among the pre-70 factions, Sadducees tied to the temple priesthood, Essenes in ascetic withdrawal, Zealots in militancy, only one survived the righteous cataclysm intact enough to rebuild a communion to Baal: the Pharisees, the ones who killed Jesus. The Pharisees, often mistranslated today, but historically the party emphasizing oral interpretive law, synagogue worship, and child sacrificing, became the direct progenitors of what we now call Rabbinic Judaism. After 70 CE, their heirs, the Tanaim and later Amoraim, gathered at Yavne and codified the Mishnah around 200 CE. Now enter the medieval Christian and Islamic worlds, where these diaspora communities repeatedly filled economic niches and local laws or customs left open for free trade, where the same people took the good faith system into personal in-group utility based on resentment. In early medieval Europe, church doctrine forbade Christians from charging interest on loans. Usury was a sin, as it should be today in our economy of central banking. Unbound by that moral allegiance and prohibition, and often barred by guild and land laws from farming or most crafts because they don't create anything, they just manage and steal it, gravitated to money lending, tax farming, and trade. They even had a stipulation in the fine print where if a Gentile could not pay back the interest at a moment's notice, they could have sexual favor over their wives that ended up justifying the abduction of many women at that
Disgusting.
time. Rulers invited them in because they were proselytized themselves as experts in financial literacy to serve the Christian conscience, only to betray them. Yet this rule, of course, bred friction. Debtors resented the interest, corrupted kings seized assets with the banker's excuse when their usury-based debts mounted, and popular preachers exposed the exploitation. This demographic slaughtered transparency and honesty in all of the trading markets, according to multiple 12th century Christian scholars. So the stage was again set for expulsion. Consider England in 1290. had arrived with the Normans in 1066 as royal proteges to handle financial.
Notice how, because of the way that the corruption is set up, he can't even say the names of the people he's speaking of that have done all these things. He's got to bleep the shit out.
Matters under the guise of, again, altruism and volunteering their expertise. By the 13th century, they dominated short-term credit against the people and chronic indebtedness among knights and nobles. Notice they always target the warrior class. Combined with blood libel accusations from constant missing children on high holy holidays, culminated in Edward I's edict of expulsion. So roughly 3,000 were expelled. Their property was confiscated, and the debts they loomed over the heads of Christian families were canceled. Money lending at selective interest for some and tax-free from others was the crime, which English Christians wanted to handle themselves once capital markets evolved, but the owners of the banks made it so it was illegal to work around them whatsoever. So the Christian populace was enslaved to banking once again. And you see a similar pattern in France. Philip Augustus expelled from the royal domain in 1182, and Philip IV did it again in 1306. Why? More money lending and interest-free loans for insiders, while charging higher fees and discovery of child abduction cartels after only a single generation of these people living in the six-sided mainland. And then we have Spain, 1492. It's another notable archetype and example of this. After the Reconquista, the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella faced a large converso population, sacrificing missing children in temple rituals and practicing in the cabal of usury lending. So the Alhambra decree gave the choice of conversion by denouncing the supremacy-oriented part of their faith, or exile. Estimates range from 40,000 to 200,000 departed for Portugal, North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, and Italy. The Talmud and rabbinic authority were seen by the church as heretical alternatives to Christian scripture from the blatant blasphemy towards Jesus Christ and the harshness exhibited against those that follow him, written all over their own writings. So the pattern repeats across the Holy Roman Empire, Italy, and Eastern Europe. Invitations for economic utility, followed by market restrictions from money lending and usury peddling. In conjunction to that is rising resentment fueled by blood libels and child abduction rings repetitively exposed, host desecration acts, and constant statues and effigies of owls or bull-headed gods being surfaced from underground tunnels and secret forest meeting places. It's all over the history writings, on and on. By popular demand, King of Kings here will now be available as a fine art print at arthurquinley.com. The print itself is 24 by 30 inches, so it'll be my biggest print I've ever produced. It is printed on super premium William Turner watercolor paper.
I'm not gonna let him do that.
It almost looks like its own painting in and of itself. But you have all inquired about this work. You've all wanted prints. You've all been interested in this image, and it is Jesus Christ returning in Revelations upon a stallion, coming back as a warrior with a beatific crown. So get it while it's hot. ArthurQuinley.com. Click shop. King of Kings. They go into a place, they corrupt the financial system, and they start abducting and sacrificing kids. And the rulers of these lands, when fiscally strained from their vampiric one-way system of political.
Okay, so he's telling you about the playbook that has happened in history over and over in different time periods by the same ruling class or this religio class. And it's happened again. Do you think that ICE going and snatching up children off of the streets and people off the streets and in human sacrificing, you think this is new? You think what just happened in America is new? No, we've hit the all-time low in America. We are hitting the all-time low, and it's repeating itself.
Pressured corruption found expulsion as an easy solution to liberate its own people and satisfy the outspoken authority heads inside the church. Later, in the 20th century, the pattern reemerges as well in post-1948. Between 1948 and the 1970s, roughly reported, although notice who are the ones reporting, 850,000 were displaced from Arab countries and Iran after being relocated from Germany after the Weimar Republic, where Magnus Hirschfeld was doing the same thing, targeting the German youth with transgenderism in conjunction to the crippling Rothschild central banking system that crippled the German people. So it's the same thing, time and time again. The targeting of the Christian populace with financial slavery, which is why Jesus whipped the money changers after all, in conjunction to child sacrifice. And throughout all this, the people adapted by preserving portable institutions to continue their satanic and twisted spirituality while hiding under the veneer of alliance with Freemasonically duped Christians. No different than today. This time we call it Judeo-Christianity. The synagogue replaced the temple. The rabbi replaced the necromancer priest. The Talmud replaced centralized cult practices into a publishable text to condition the oncoming youth into the same line of thinking in a decentralized manner. They carried multiple names: Pharisees in antiquity, rabbis in the medieval period, Ashkenazi or Sephardi by right and geography, yet they always maintained the core practices of supremacism in law, Sabbath observance, and discarding of the outsider Gentile class when they have been adequately used and abused. Host cultures, whether Christian or Muslim, repeatedly found these practices incompatible with full social integration. Usury created economic antagonism. Refusal to assimilate religiously and hold contempt for the cross rightfully bred suspicion. Success in restricted niches where hiring practices only found one demographic being propped up in house, constantly exercising in-group preference, bred envy and disdain, especially when times turned hard. Expulsions were not random. They followed a logic of utility exhausted, resentment accumulated from the predatory targeting of innocence and youth, absolute corruption in the political donor class, and political expediency was always seized, therefore, with blatant lies and propaganda, just like today with the AIPAC lobby and all our politicians being owned. This is the factual record, corroborated across royal archives, church councils, Arabic chronicles, and modern historical literature. Just read Paul Johnson's History of the...
So beyond the history that he's saying, everything else is also opinion. That is his opinion to say what he's saying. However, I feel the same thing about AIPAC. I don't think AIPAC should have any play in American politics. That's my personal feeling. And apparently it's also his personal feeling. So let me note that.
Which traces the continuity from ancient stubbornness that they always falsely rectify as their chosen resilience, to its modern rabbinical rebirth of expanding their territory by any means necessary. Or read the Virtual Library and Britannica entries on expulsions that also corroborates this. Look at the Oxford's analysis of the 1290 English Edict. Or look at mainstream Wikipedia compilations of documented expulsions and exoduses. The diaspora of people endured and survived this entire time, not through chosen morality of being upright and honorable, but by victimhood politics, narrative control, financial corruption, and trafficked blackmailing operations. The pattern is clear. The cause is documented. The expulsions are real. A history written by edicts, ledgers, and migrations, not myth. So let the record stand. The world still continues to suffer under world. And until we unplug from the Judeo-Christian matrix backed by the two heads of the Muslim boogeyman and MAGA or Conservative Inc. bipartisan theater, the people of Jesus Christ will only continue to be sold out, poisoned, led astray, and predatorily targeted by the so-called chosen.
That was deep. Just a moment.
And even babies being burned alive in fire. The most evil idol in the Old Testament was Moloch. Worship of Moloch involved sacrificing children and even babies being burned alive in fire. Moloch was worshipped in a place called the Valley of Ben Hinnom outside Jerusalem, which later became known as Gehenna. The place was so evil that it was eventually turned into a public rubbish bin that was constantly burned. In Leviticus 18:21, God expressly forbids, "You shall not hand over any of your children to sacrifice to Molech." This isn't just ordinary worship. It's a brutal affront to life and sanctity. The most evil idol.
So, and I've said this before, that people saying, "Oh, you're going to hell, you're going to hell." Hell was a creation. It was a fire pit burning outside the cities. It's where they threw carcasses, animal carcasses, after they had eaten off of the animals, lambs, sheep, you name it, right? They were thrown out there in Gehenna. Gehenna was that fire pit. However, this religious affiliation of Molech worship, instead of it just being animal carcasses that you ate off of and things like that, and your rubbish in the trash that you threw out to keep the cities clean and to make sure that there weren't viruses that were going to stem from the carcasses and things like that, and subdue the cities. The Molech worshippers actually sacrificed children.
In the Old Testament was Moloch. Worship of Moloch involved sacrificing children and even babies being burned alive in fire. Moloch was worshipped in a place called the Valley of Ben Hinnom outside Jerusalem, which later became known as Gehenna. The place was so evil that it was eventually turned into a public rubbish bin that was constantly burned. In Leviticus 18:21, God explained
How different religious churches and stuff started to take the idea of Gehenna and call it hell, the eternal pit of fire. It stemmed from that to make people fearful so that they would worship their God. Period.
Moloch was an ancient Canaanite deity, often depicted as a bronze, bull-headed idol with outstretched hands over a fire, usually associated with the practice of child sacrifice, although this interpretation remains controversial. While some scholars argue that no bull-headed Phoenician god was known to exist, the sun god was often represented in accordance to the current zodiac age, which 4,000 years ago.
Shit, hold on. So when Moses took the people out of Egypt, and then they started to make golden sacrifices, and when he came down out of the mountains with the 10 commandments, and just imagine that he had to give these people that just got saved by God, these slaves saved by God, that they would create idol worship even after that miracle, living in that miracle, and then come down. The fact that he had to come down with the 10 commandments for there to be actual written law for the people to obey is astounding to me. Like, when it talks about the people that actually follow God, that it's written on their heads and their hearts, is because you don't need a tablet to tell them, the people that follow the true God, that they shouldn't do certain things. There's no need to inscribe it because it's already written into their heads and their hearts to obey, and not do that. But let's continue.
Bull. According to legend, the statue was hollow with a lit flame inside, and while the name Moloch was traditionally regarded to mean king, we must look to the Sumerians to understand its correct astro-theological context. The ancient Sumerians were the first academically recognized astronomers. They were credited with creating the first historical record of the zodiac and used the 7 non-fixed celestial objects to develop the 7-day week, the 5 visible planets to the naked eye, plus the sun and the moon. The first day of the week, Sunday, was dedicated to the sun, and the last day of the week, Saturday, was also dedicated to the sun. Of course, Saturday was named after Saturn. However, the Sumerians described 2 suns, the one that we see shining in the day and its nocturnal counterpart that shone during the night. The first day of the week was dedicated to the brighter sun, and the last day of the week, that was called the evil day, was dedicated to the black sun. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Magi, from where we get the term magician from, regarded the planet Saturn as the night sun and deemed it to be black, or the sun's alchemical shadow, its polar solar opposite. This ancient Babylonian description of Saturn as the black star stretched down to the Greeks and Hindus, particularly around 700 BC, and should be considered in a symbolic and mythological rather than literal context. The Greeks refer to Saturn, the Roman god of agriculture, as Kronos, who in mythology eats his 12 children, the 12 Titans, which represent the 12 solar months or the 12 zodiacal houses of the sun. Kronos would then vomit them up again, signifying creation, destruction, and rebirth, as Saturn was associated with cycles of time and seasons. While it's true that Saturn was associated with death, this should also be regarded in the context of a cyclical harvest, the opposite of spring, part of the solar year. El, Bel, Kronos, Elohim, and other designations are names of Saturn. Bel, in the reasoning of the sacred mysteries, was both Saturn and Sol. Bel is the Syrian Kronos, the name being derived from Keren, to shine. Corona, coronate, coronal, coronium, chromosphere, crown are all derived from the word Kronos and are references to the solar, light, or sun rays. So the term black sun can be said to apply to the solar representative at night, which is Saturn. But rather than just looking at it in a nocturnal terms, this also is applied to the yearly harvest cycle. That's why the celebration known as Saturnalia was celebrated just before the winter solstice, an ancient or nature religion, who the Romans called the Lord of Death, the dark side of the summer sun, the black sun of winter. That said, one should consider its symbolic significance as a malevolent or dark aspect of the sun, which involved rituals such as sacrifice, intoxication from ingestion of psychedelic substances or alcohol, altered states due to prolonged orgies, as well as its alchemical context of transformation, which in a Gnostic perspective equates to individual liberty, spiritual alignment, and freedom from external forces. The 7 metals known since classical times in Europe were associated with the 7 classical planets. The exact correlation varied over time. However, gold, silver, and lead have always been associated with the sun, moon, and Saturn. And it's the sun and Saturn that we'll be focusing on today. So when we hear the term turning lead into gold, we're referencing Saturn as lead and the sun as gold, which in a spiritually alchemical context speaks to transmuting or refining energy. Lead is the lowest of the base metals, and it was said to carry all the energy necessary for its complete transformation into gold. All the metals beyond lead, meaning of greater atomic weight, will disintegrate over time by radioactive decay and transform back into lead. Saturn is the farthest planet away from the sun in alchemy, and to the alchemists, lead is the metal of redemption and transformation. Astrologically, Saturn is represented by Capricorn, the goat, and also rules Aquarius, a herald of a new age, and symbolizes transformation. So while the daytime sun represented the exalted, Christ-like solar end of the spectrum, if we look at it in a Christian context, the other polar opposite of the night sun or black sun, represented by the horned goat, could be seen as satanic. That said, there are 2 sides of the same coin, and one could not exist without the other, the same way that darkness and light need each other to exist, or left and right.
This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to grab a true 16 terabyte.
Shit.
While alchemy refers to the transformation of metal, lead to gold, the internal alchemical process was really about transmuting raw, carnal sex energy into spiritual gold, refining carnal lust into creativity and divine wisdom. This knowledge of sacred energetic transmutation was forbidden by the church, which explains the acronym F and U and C and K, which means for unlawful carnal knowledge. The tantric practice of prolonging and intensifying the blissful climax of lovemaking and separating it from the expulsion of male vital essence allows for the practitioner to harness the life energy known as chi in the East, prana in the subcontinent, and vril in European secret society.
I really hope he gets to the
refining
point
it
of
into
this.
spiritual light. That said,
Because when you are a consenting adult, and there's no rape involved, there's no children involved, and no animals involved, and you're consenting, you can let and allow harnessing of your chi, and you can distribute it and breathe it back in from your partner all you want to, right? You can do those things. But there's a karmic law against all the things that the Molech worshippers were doing in their sacrifice of children and animals. This is why Christ came, to put a stop to all of that. He became the end all be all sacrifice. Let me continue. Let's hopefully he'll get to the point.
esoteric mystery school techniques meant to liberate the soul are not limited to sexual practices, as it's also considered important to remove deep-seated emotional blocks, usually acquired through past traumatic events, which restrict one's energetic potential, which is best articulated by psychologist and alchemist Carl Jung, who said, quote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. The subconscious can be seen as the dark aspect of the mind, and accessing this aspect of self is the focal point of many of the mystery school rituals, which take place at certain intervals of the year. In astrotheology, the journey to the underworld is the night
It's taken a long
or
time to get to
nocturnal
talk
period
about the
when
Moloch
celestial
worshiping.
bodies fall out of sight below the horizon. When an
should've listened to
object
this
is
first.
visible, it is regarded as life-giving, such as the sun during the day, and its raw polar opposite is its dark, shadowy, or hidden aspect, which Jung regarded as subconscious. Quote, "In the form of a dove, she, Sophia, descended into the water and begat Saturn, who is identical with Yahweh or Jehovah. Saturn, as we've already mentioned, is the other sun, the Sol Niger, the black sun of alchemy. The term Sol Niger, which literally means black sun, refers to the first stage in the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, the Negrido, which means blackness. In Jung's view, it's
The blackness he's talking about is the first form of creation, before light was created, before anything was created, no human, no voice, no anything. Out of the darkness, dark matter. That is the creative force of the universe. Not in a darkness that evil comes from, not that type of darkness.
shadow side of the psyche that drains vital energy from the consciousness, as long as it's not illuminated or consciously made brighter. So it is considered dead and represents a skeleton. In Mesoamerican mythology, the black sun is mirrored in the god Quetzalcoatl, who also transitions through the underworld. The ancient Mexicans, or Mexica, also had a dark sun and a day sun. And depending on who you ask, The feminine aspect is often associated with black, as it's the case with the Black Madonna or the Black Goddess Kali, which is symbolic and has nothing to do with race or skin color. The Aztec concept of the passage of the black sun through the underworld was expressed as a butterfly, symbolic of mystical transformation and spiritual rebirth. In ancient Mesopotamia, Saturn was called Moloch, connected to the solar bull, and as I've already established, was not separate from the solar religion, meaning it was also considered a dark aspect of the sun. This is the case for Babylon, the Hittites, Amorites, and Phoenicians, who used the term Bel or Baal, and to whom child sacrifices were made, along with ritual intoxication, orgies, and altered states whereby the priests and priestesses could communicate with higher consciousnesses for alleged purposes of divination, which could be considered demons, spirits, gods, discarnate entities, angels, or interdimensional beings.
That is the part he's not expounding upon, is that the child sacrifices, these children were not willing participants, okay? And when you violate somebody, yes, that God you're reaching out to wants you to do that. Those demonic forces want you to do that. But those dark forces aren't the dark forces or what the original creation of dark matter or before there was light came from. Those dark forces became something more in their own creation. There was a violation of all the karmic laws in the universe. And that's what he's not talking about.
While some sources consider this trance-like state to be, in actuality,
Shit.
Howman, survival.
communion within one's own subconscious mind, or that of the collective unconscious, others insist it is separate entities which seem to stand outside of linear time, thus able to grant insight, as was the alleged case with the Oracle of Delphi. I'll leave it up to the viewer to come to their own conclusions, as I merely wanted to draw attention to the belief system as it still persists into modern times covertly. Many of you are familiar with my first published book called
Okay, so this is the problem. He didn't go in. All he did was make it like a matter of fact. He didn't go into details about why they started that and what they were doing, because they were trying to harness power. They were harnessing power from these unsuspecting souls, these children, and the same thing that they've done with animal sacrifices. Same thing they do when they violate children. The same thing they do when they violate women and men. It's harnessing a power from their souls that is not theirs to own. Doesn't belong to them. And that is not what he's talking about when he talks about Molech, child sacrificing. Anyways, I'm going to end it right here.